Welcome to Tea Time. The reading room is now open. Let's see what these people are saying and read them by reading their articles. Parents think their kids are doing well in school more often than not. They're wrong. I agree. The average little kid grows up to be an average big kid who grows up to be an average adult. A bad little kid grows up to be a bad big kid who grows up to be a bad adult. And a little kid who doesn't like to do math and conjugate B verbs properly grows up to be a big kid who speaks only in local southern vernacular, who grows up to be an adult who hates math, thinks it's dumb, and can't understand the value of using language verb tense properly. So the adults are definitely having the kids, and then the kids are the reflections of the adults, and America is in a heck of a bunch of hot water. But this whole thing of blaming it on COVID-19, adults caused the school closures because of what? I don't know, because they were primarily obese and they would have had adverse reactions. The science said the kids wouldn't have had much of a hard time with it. And then the parents, administrators, and teachers who pushed school closure, which was basically just a walkout where all the kids got free A's and stuff. It was only for a term or a semester in 2020. That was 4 years ago. 4 years ago. They talk about following the science and all sorts of other stuff, but were they following the science then? No, just like they don't follow the science on corporal punishment. They don't follow the science on a little bit of personal responsibility and where the emotions come from. Guess what? From the individual's brain. You know, we all got eyes and ears and we're subject to sensate data coming into those eyes and ears and whatnot, but that different people respond differently to the same conditions suggests that there's internal locus of control. I mean, I can be canceled or whatever, but you can't cancel the facts. So, no, they're not doing very well. They don't know their math. They don't know their science. They can't hardly speak English on average. The odd one is doing very well. And a long time ago, or not so long ago actually, it would have been that the rest of them understood that they're just not doing well, and it's not a moral failing to not do well. It's more failing to not try and then not do well. But there would have been an understanding not so long ago that there was implicit value in education, and that's what I see lacking in these kids, is that they just don't think that school is important, and maybe then the adults kind of convince them of that or reconfirm their pre-existing bias towards school during COVID-19 when they all went home and got A's and decided that, I don't know, who knows? I can only guess because people don't really talk about stuff very well. They say 5 words and then act like they said 100 million, and mic drops all over the place for a dirty look. Mean mugging. Anyway, I'm not trying to have COVID recovery for the next 10 years like we had global financial crisis recovery for 12 years after global financial crisis. Literally, the news was talking about recovery in 2019, just prior to COVID, and then they went into crisis again, and I want to hear about recovery for the next 5 years. We're recovered from that, but there's other stuff going on. Let's just take a middle path then, shall we, instead of exaggerating, catastrophizing everything and acting like COVID-19 was so much when it was an error. It was a bunch of errors, and there's misleading information and all that, but let's be a little more honest, shall we? Done with that. Thank you. Lots of budget stuff, right? Biden canceled 5.8 billion. Yesterday it was 6 billion. Interesting. So the news gets it right, gets it wrong, corrects or doesn't correct itself, and hardly anybody notices. $2 billion, that's a lot of money. Where does it go? Oh, in this case, school repair and replace aging buildings. $2 billion does not go far for building. Too many regulations. I built a house in Thailand. It was a small house, very, very small house, but for $5,000 out of pocket. And that's a lot of money for me, but I didn't have to pay any fees, no permits, nothing. Just go build a house. You don't have to pay any bribes. We all talk about the Republicans love to talk about regulations and decreasing regulations. America's so regulated. And so like $2 billion per school just get caught up in red tape and administrative stuff. And people know this. They talk about it all the time. Here's one for you. Why is it controversial to ban cell phones? This is maybe the number one problem with teenagers and how they're thinking now, because they've always got their little go-to buddy in their pocket who's telling them that they can say and do whatever they want, and they're the center of the universe on that phone, where they've got millions of people across the world their age telling them that what they think, which is actually not right, is right. You know, they've got that little codependent device there in their pocket that's going to tell them that what's wrong is right and what's right is wrong. And they're going to tell them that their rights are wrong and their wrongs are right, and so on and so forth. Rarely does a school actually man up and woman up and put on the big boy and big girl pants and ban the phones. Because why? I can only guess. The parents don't have that much power. I guess they could vote out a district board member, but I mean, are they? I just kind of doubt it. There's politicization in the superintendent's office and in the districts, but it's more a matter of perception that the principals and the teachers even feel threatened somehow. And it's similar to the situation which the Supreme Court recently heard about, the Biden administration having contacts at social media, which is not coercion. Those people at those companies might have felt some way, but unless there's actual direct coercion and evidence thereof, then it's just some sort of feeling that they infer, and inferences can be wrong. Of course, now that is not a popular idea nowadays, when feelings are one of Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianov's 4 or 5 great errors that people should pay attention to all their feelings. But feelings can be wrong. People can be wrong. I see it in math class all the time. People get wrong answers. They think the wrong thing. They have miscomprehensions. They don't just have mistakes, like that they know how to do something and then they do it wrong. They actually have miscomprehensions. They don't understand how to do the thing that they're trying to do. How does that happen in school and in math class if it doesn't actually happen elsewhere? It just doesn't make sense. But like I said in the previous episode here, we've got news. It's all in this nice little boxes, and each of them has their own little headlines, and they're all together in one page or whatever, but hardly anybody actually takes a bunch of them, puts them together, and makes sense of it. See, 4 Richardson elementary schools will close next year. Interesting. What else? Thought leaders in higher education experts converge in Savannah. Thought leaders, well, they're leading somebody. Probably also being led. Oh, there's the $6 billion. So was it $6 billion or was it $5.8 billion? Was it 6 or 5.8? Oh, there it's 5.8. Well, that's not accurate then. I guess that's rounding up. Okay, so getting clicks with the headline. Interesting. Is college worth it? Yeah, it's worth it as long as you have the right degree program. I say that to people just about every week anyway, that if you choose a STEM degree, then it's totally worth it. If you choose a liberal arts degree, meh. Maybe not, depending on where you go. Probably not. The overall cost of college, yeah, $140,000 between tuition and room and board. I hope I see an article about those student athletes trying to get money coming up, because they get paid over $100,000 a year. The average student might pay $140,000, but for the lifestyles of those NCAA Division I primetime student athletes, they're up in the $300,000-$400,000 range between the accommodations they get, the meals they get, the travel, the apparel, plus the tuition. They get tutoring, they get access to all the places that nobody else can go to. And then here they're acting like, well, they've been enslaved by the institution, which is actually paying them already. And granted, I'm not a big fan of the NCAA. If you ask me, they purposefully created a drug testing regime that allows people to cheat so that they get more spectacular play that schools can then market to media companies at higher royalty rates. And granted, the University of Michigan, Texas, Alabama, Clemson, they all make more money from the athletic department than from tuition, but it's really a RICO. It's a racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization. Because they knew or should have known, judges love to say that, they knew or should have known that those players had used performance-enhancing drugs, which means that they were ineligible to play in the beginning. And as college is becoming so expensive, why isn't anybody really recognizing that just about the only way to become a scholarship athlete on a football team in particular, but also basketball and baseball and wrestling, my goodness, wrestling. The only way to perform at that level is to use performance-enhancing drugs. And so then the people who don't want to use performance-enhancing drugs are just like out of the market. But of course, that's all tied up in the courts for years. And they've got all those fancy lawyers and medical doctors and professors and business people there to back them. And that's everybody's great pride as a big, stupid football team, isn't it? So round and round we go. But that sure is unfair to the person who's just a natural athlete who could be good. I guess they don't run as fast or... You think that guy at 300 pounds can run a 4.8 40 and jump 30 inches and push 225 pounds off his chest 30 times, does not use performance-enhancing drugs. You are... I would like to sell you some magic beans, friend. I would... I have an investment for you. Woke universities are a myth. That's ridiculous. Overt apathy and fatigue about tackling these issues giving rise to white supremacy. Well, this is... Sure. I guess so. Oh, that's the University of Manchester. That's in England. Well, let the Brits talk it out. I think it's pretty well decided anymore that woke is a dumb word, but that's the word that people use to describe this thing which has been happening, which is not quite right. And that thing is having a true opinion and then false opinions when really they're all just opinions. It's also been a total misuse of mathematics. What do we got here? Unfortunately, the news outlet, the title across the top there kind of tells you the slant, doesn't it? That's the thing about looking at the news. Like I said before, you get half the story or less. What else I got here? What else? I'm sure $1.7 trillion in debt. I've been paying for a lot of years. And then Mohella or whatever, they condensed all the loans and transferred them over, and now they're saying I didn't pay for the 10 years or whatever. I mean, they're pretty fishy about how they calculate their payments. But I don't really think the Fox newscaster is in any position to comment. They don't even have student loans. They all came from rich families. They get paid $200,000, $500,000 a year. I don't really want to hear their opinion. Would I take a cancellation? You betcha. You betcha. Because it is overpriced, and like I said, they're all racketeering, influence, and corrupt organizations, more or less. Anything else? What else we got? I guess that's all for the news, isn't it? STEM master's degree, fast track to STEM. And so I guess I'm going to turn off the news here since it's just, what is it there to do? I mean, I guess I'm kind of getting information, but I'm also getting a lot of opinion. Like there's the facts, and then there's the narrative, which is just story. And I don't know, I like to kind of make up my own mind, which is not exactly what the average consumer does. So again, congratulations for the media people for recognizing how they can make money. Unfortunately, they're kind of misleading people. People who probably think that the news is just like it was Walter Cronkite today. I mean, maybe back then they should have said a whole lot more about Vietnam or whatever, considering that just a few years prior to Vietnam War, which was the Gulf of Tonkin, just staged, just a few years prior, the United Nations, including the United States, all signed a treaty on the, what do they call it, the self-determination of peoples to break free of their colonial shackles. And so basically everybody said, yeah, I guess the people of Vietnam and whatever else have been colonized had rights to become independent, but they just didn't like what kind of government then the Vietnamese were going to have. And so they tried to save a French colony. That's pretty silly. By slaughtering how many people? I don't know. Look at the John Kerry's Winter Soldier testimony. On to other things. Let's look at the, where is it? Looking for my master business thesis here. And we're looking for economic. There it is. Let's have a quick review of this, and then I think I'll probably include it in another episode. Like I was saying before, the internet is this wonderful resource, but people ought to use targeted keyword searches and not just be passive consumers of whatever comes into their feed, which is just there to suck up all their time, plowing nonsense into their minds, more or less. So I had, speaking of education, the opportunity to be a student at the Institute of International Studies at Rom-Com-Hing. And my master's program was actually the testing track. So I didn't have to write a thesis, but I was really excited and kind of getting practice for my doctoral dissertation. So I decided to write a thesis and take a big test. And so I spent the better half of 2009 and almost all of 2010 putting this thing together. And it's meant to be kind of a joke, because I thought that the world's economic systems were kind of a joke. But it's also serious. Look at all these references. I got 105 pages. No, I got not 105. There's appendices down here. How many pages of references? Some of those are from InfoTrack, and then others from the World Wide Web. InfoTrack, I got a membership with the textbook, I think. So we got 222. That's 75 pages of references. And that's what the internet is good for. There's so much stuff available, but you kind of got to know how to look for something, which apparently a lot of people don't. So what I thought was, all of these organizations are pretty cool. All of these international organizations are actually pretty darn cool. The UN and IMF and WTO and G20, well, is it G19 now? Russia's not in there. I'll fast forward. G7, it's not the G8, it's the G7. I thought they were all like a new way of life, you know? As opposed to all just adversarialism and feudalism before. Countries are, at least on paper, trying to organize and work together. And then here are just all the business acronyms. And then on the other side of this is like my mandala. This is my business mandala. Merit and grace and infinity, and you got all these other social and cultural ideas and institutions that, like it or not, are still what people do, even though they're going to work, not just going to work. So way back when, I had the idea that money is the most basic unit of currency, which is just medium exchange, way to store value. It's also some kind of weird power, socio-political, economic matter is what I called it, like matter, like substance, matter. And that's basically just a thought or an emotion or neurochemical exchange. It happens in the brain. It's not stuff. It's not the laws of physics. It's all imaginary. And I understand that's like taboo or whatever to say, but that's what it is. So, get used to it. And sometime in the future, people are actually going to have to deal with that. That's imaginary. And that likewise, the source of all of our other stuff is the imagination. And that's where the cash or the crypto or the whatever wampum. We could be trading smiles, friends. We could be smiling our way to riches. We could be trading fruits and livestock. Of course, that's impractical over great distances and with different people because, not everybody needs a goat, which is where you get money, but valuation is not just like set in stone. It's very much, it's a collective effort, but it's very much just going on in the brain. And it switched from gold standard Bretton Woods and then to fiat currency, and now we got crypto. It will likely change in the future. 500 years, I don't know, maybe. But it's not gonna just stay, the dollar is the king of the currencies and everybody's gotta exchange at the bank of blah 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 in dollars or whatever special drawing rights out of the IMF. It's just what people make it. And how and why that became something, I don't even know. That's just a fact. It just shows how full of fantasy people are. So I had some hypotheses. I was going to make hypotheses. People want democracies. They want to say so. I'm not sure that the majority rules is the best system myself, but I think people like that. I think the history shows that the majority is often wrong, and in fact, the best things that we have come from a very, very small segment of our people. And then trendsetters or whatever, like Galileo and Newton and others, are not representative of the majority. In fact, most people don't want anything to do with that. But whatever, I guess we're democracy good. I mean, it beats totalitarian dictatorship. So anyway, I had some hypotheses that people want to feel good and have good things rather than bad things. And anymore, I don't know that their actions actually back up these beliefs, but they have that belief. So I tried to integrate micro, macro, individual, collective, public, private, national, international. So these dichotomies that we often come up with, especially micro, macro, isn't that something where they got the unified fields theory, and then there's a whole culture of mystifying physics, and I've even heard the economists have physics envy, because they try to act like, they try to act like it's an actual science, rather than just kind of a science. They use math. But this micro-macro thing is really interesting. Individual, collective. These are, we can find evidence of something like that, but it's not just such a strong dichotomy. A collective is a group of individuals. Public and private, there's another one. Let's look at that quickly. So, way back, Pedro Pele from the Florida Southeastern University was my economics professor over there. And let's start off with a joke. 3 men walk into a bar. One says he's a capitalist, one says he's a socialist, and one says he's a communist. The bartender kicks them all out, says we don't serve fascists in this establishment. They're bad for business. And here we got little caricatures of the dudes who, say what you want, they had more or less of one of those, but they all failed to respect private property in their own, and failed to respect public property. But we've decided, for whatever reason, we're stuck on this communism, socialism, capitalism thing, and then, conveniently, there is this other thing, credit and corporatism. And so Pedro Pele told us about what these actually mean in economic terms. Capitalism was privately owned and privately operated. Right? Socialism was publicly owned and privately operated. Socialism was publicly owned and publicly operated. Communism was publicly owned and publicly operated. And then we got this corporatism, which I say is privately owned and publicly operated. So those are, if you draw a box, there's private and public, ownership and operatorship. And each country, this is the first part of the thesis here, each country has a balance of these to different degrees. There's no country that's purely capitalist, which would be silly because the government's public. There has to be public stuff. It's not publicly owned, so it can't be capitalist. And I don't want a capitalist government. It's public. That would be weird. It can't be privately owned. It's just weird. But sure enough, private property is, respected at different degrees in different places. But like, if you actually think about it, which most people don't like to do because it's scary, or it's boring. If you think about what public and private is, this is a pretty sticky issue. We call them public corporations, but they're actually private. Is the court really public? Can you go do things in the public sphere like outside in the public street, I guess you can do just about anything, but then there's public interference with private rights, and there's private influence on public, right? And there's really a blurred line when you get down to things like the Defense Department. Lockheed Martin, is that public or is that private? They can't just sell what they want to anybody, and they have a monopsony. The government has a monopsony basically on certain things from these companies here. Is the president a private? Is a government agent a private actor? I hope not, because then they're going to pursue their own private interest. And they do. They don't pursue the public interest. But what's the public? Is it just the people that voted for that person? Or is it all the people? So there's blurred lines here. Let's skip forward. Maybe I'll come back to that later. Let's look at Anglocentric oikos nomos. So there's been a lot of talk about stuff lately. And I'm a little perturbed because it's kind of old news, actually. We've been through this, and the trajectory has changed significantly. So for those who are just now joining this idea that there's stuff happening, it would be nice if they didn't try to force a conclusion, because people have kind of dealt with this one before for quite some time. Like this guy right here, who in 2009 and 10 was looking at this. So we've all seen this little evolutionary picture before, but I decided, in each chapter for the thesis, I've made a little joke. And you can see, they go from monkey to Cro-Magnon to priest to lord to soldier and to fat man holding drink in underwear. Because that is the pinnacle, that's the peak of the English economic evolution there. Fat man holding drink, and I suppose now it would be looking down at phone. Obese man, you can see that, the British soldier, isn't he upright? He's got that tall hat showing that he's grown so tall. And then, of course, the downslides. So the Anglocentric oikos nomos, Anglo meaning, Anglo, British, centric meaning that's the center of everything right there in Britain. Oikos nomos, that's a word that Pedro Pele taught us. Oikos comes from Greek, means management, and then nomos is the house, or maybe the other way around. Oikos is house and nomos is management. So economics, the word economic actually comes from oikonomos, which means management of the house. Just like bank comes from bank or bench, which is also the judge. So the judge was the bank. So public and private are a little bit blurry. And in business classes, there was something like 4 Ps or something like this, so I made up my own 4 Cs of the English-speaking house, which is contradiction, confound, conflict, and crisis. And then, so back in 08, 09, and 10, there was a lot of stuff in the news. Like a lot of just outrageous stuff coming through the news, which I think is still going on. I think it's still going on, but there's been a shift in the conversation and in how the government is responding. So I think somewhere in here, I'm going to skip past a lot of this, but somewhere in here I start talking about, I just list one I was on the FBI blotter for a long time. They sent me emails about all their callers and whatnot, and there's just one corrupt politician after another, after another, after another, after another. Just indictments and scandals galore that maybe nobody heard of. I think are still going on. But anyway, let's look at the headlines. Confounds, Hollywood confounds. Well, but if that's illegal, why do they get to do it and propagate it around the world, show it on every big screen? Well, if the law is this, then why does this guy get to do that? Well, if prostitution's illegal, why is it illegal for them to just pay two people to have sex on camera? That's a fair question. It's no longer prostitution if they're on camera. That's pretty silly. So Hollywood's, got its ups. There's good points and bad points. People everywhere, right? Good points and bad points. Conflicts. Like, what was that Fifth Amendment? Or maybe it was the Fourth for the Catholics, or the Sixth for the Catholics, or it's 4, 5, and 6 for different churches. Don't kill, but then Mike Pence is writing Christian scriptures on bombs or something. This is just silly. It's a pretty big conflict there. And again, all of this is like don't touch type stuff. That's like mom and dad said, because I said so. And then we're all just supposed to go, oh, okay, we'll go and do other things and not ever talk about that. I don't know what Matthew 19:24 is, but I guess that has something to do with what? Therefore, that must be the eye of a camel, the eye of a needle. Those are some pretty big needles, friends, pretty tiny camels. Again, conflicts, confounds in song. Our culture shows like the exact opposite of what our stated principles are, and people love it. And then they act like the things that happen on television and on the radio are not actual things happening, like those aren't real people. It's kind of like when they took the mobile phone to some tribe and somebody thought there was a person stuck in the device, What happens on screens is real people, friend. And then, of course, the war crises. And in 2009 and 10, this is like well into the 20 Years' War, where it was very obvious that there were no weapons of mass destruction. It was very obvious that there was just a lot of crime. Did those men did they get their passports stamped? I don't think so. Was that legal immigration, those men in those uniforms just sitting around? I don't think so. Did they have jurisdiction in that country? I don't think so. So that's the Anglo-centric, almost. The law, the religion, and the war and the economy are all one, basically. Until further notice, it's very much a problem. And then, of course, more confounds. The drug war confound. I mean, it's all in the... Well, I guess right there it is. The Christians who conveniently forgot Genesis 1:29. Conveniently. Isn't that interesting? And then allow people to make millions and millions and billions on music and movies showing what nobody is allowed to do. And then the MLB and the NFL, sure. Yeah, so lots of problems to deal with in business, like lots of money being made, and then here we are back to the university. So that takes us back to education. We've come around full circle. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of like what I've been mulling over for the past 20 years or something like that. That sometime in the Bush administration, they actually made a new law about anabolic steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. And there wasn't it a big charade when they banned the Russians from the Olympics? Weren't they just so angry at those Russians? But those Russians who did those drugs actually performed lesser than other people who didn't do drugs? I don't think so. That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. The person who used performance-enhancing drugs doesn't perform as well as the person who doesn't use it. That doesn't make any sense. That suggests that there's almost no difference. There's a huge difference. Big. But again, people don't like to think because they get sad or angry, and then what? Then they'll get caught up in a loop or what? I don't know. They can't go to work if they have this. I don't know. And so then, coincidentally, a long time ago in that MBA program, I was looking at YouTube videos, and for educational purposes, not just for like space aliens and moon landing hoaxes and stuff. or twerking videos or whatever people watch. But for educational purposes, and I was really inspired by that, Pedro Pele especially, in the MBA program. And so I looked up some things about economics. And one thing I came across was this Ludwig von Mises school. And I think it was Roderick Long. No, I didn't really like most of his speech on how anarchy was really ordered. It was weird to me. I didn't agree. But he said something that stuck, which was that economic order presupposes a legal order. And I said, well, yeah, maybe that's what's going on here, that we don't actually have legal order. And we don't. It's even more exaggerated now than it was before. There's no legal order. The law is one thing one day, and literally it changes the next. And they can't do anything in the Congress more now than ever. They got to decide to pay the bill for a month, and then they got to argue about whether they're going to pay the bill again. It's silly. And we have no legal order, basically. And this is, at the tail end of a 20-year war, which is a complete crime, where people have just been busy justifying and making weird loophole arguments and rationalizing things, which are awful, just awful, awful things. It takes a toll. And so the economic crises are very much a product of an out-of-control legal situation where people can do illegal things. They just have to be able to pay for it after they do it, or they have to be able to hire lawyers to do this weird voodoo with the paperwork. It's just weird. And then uncoincidentally, that trickles down, and that gets people. That's probably where our culture war comes from. Probably, but anyway. So that's the news. I guess I'm going to get out of here. This has been tea time. The reading room is now closing. Bye.